the other day, I was talking to the weatherman about today. I know all he could say was no one knows tomorrow. See, I can read the weather child, I can tell my be the river for the sunshine. But that's as far as my guess goes, cause no one knows tomorrow. No one knows tomorrow. Time it wasn't need to go to war. All the kidding just to settle someone else's score. But the future isn't even sure. No one knows tomorrow. So we can study history and philosophy and places ideology. But tomorrow is a mystery. No one knows tomorrow. No one knows tomorrow. No one knows tomorrow. No one knows tomorrow. Tomorrow is your opportunity to fail or be successful if you please. Yes, indeed, tomorrow is a politician's today. Is the victim of decisions and the future of our children. So when I die someday, will I be in heavenly places singing hallelujah with an angel on the piano? Or will I be just another contribution to
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is The Dialogue, a series on the state of education, particularly basic education in Nigeria. The Dialogue is sponsored by Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, WSCIJ, under its Regulators Monitoring Program, REMO, and brought to you by Strictly Speaking in partnership with Premium Times. I'm Bimbo Oloyede, and I've been your host for the past 5 weeks. Amazingly, the series ends today. And to those who have been part of this journey, let me call it that, I say a very big thank you to all of you. If you missed any of the episodes, well, you can always catch up on our social media pages. Our discussions have always been based on stories that were written by journalists who were sponsored to observe, investigate, and report on issues related to basic education. This sixth episode is no different, although we will discuss an additional topic before we close. I'll be joined on the dialogue today by Ayodele Adeniran, a senior photojournalist at the Guardian newspaper, and Emiene Erame, editor, All Women Media. As usual, we're also expecting a special guest to join us, and we will welcome him shortly. I can see actually that he's already here. Today, we're looking at sanitation facilities in schools across Lagos and the FCT. But before we begin, here's some information about sanitation in Nigeria. According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 100 million Nigerians still lack basic sanitation facilities, and 63 million do not have access to improved sources of drinking water. Open defecation is still practiced by about 1/3 of the rural population, and some 12% of the urban population also practice open defecation. Now, sustainable water, sanitation and hygiene is known as WASH, that's W-A-S-H, and they're critical for providing safe, quality healthcare. This problem spreads across several sectors in Nigeria, including education. Ayodele Adeniran and Emiene Erame both visited schools in Lagos and the FCT to ascertain their WASH standards. Ayodele, welcome, first of all. Welcome to the dialogue. Now, I wonder if you can use Lagos and the FCT as benchmarks for us. Can we determine whether or not developing countries like Nigeria have the most basic water, sanitation, and hygiene services, especially in schools? Ayodele. I thought I saw an indication that you'd already joined us this morning. Okay. If he's not with us, Emiene, maybe you could take that question, because I know that you visited schools. What's your assessment? Can we determine whether or not developing countries like Nigeria have the most basic sanitation and hygiene services? Good. Hello?
We can hear you, ma.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, ma.
Okay, all right. I'm so sorry about that. I had a bit of a technical issue, so I've decided to change sources. I hope this is clearer now. Okay, Emiene, let me get back to you. We were talking about the issue of sanitation and hygiene services in schools. And I referred to Lagos and the FCT. And I asked if we could use those two major cities as landmarks, especially for hygiene services in schools. Can you please pick up on that question? You'll have to unmute yourself, please. Please unmute.
Okay,
Emiene?
sorry, ma. I didn't get your question. I didn't hear. Network was not clear. I didn't hear you. Can you hear me now?
Okay. I hope that this network is not going to bedevil us this morning. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Now,
Yes,
using Lagos and the FCT as benchmarks, I'm asking whether we can determine whether or not developing countries like Nigeria have the most basic water, sanitation, and hygiene services, especially in schools. You visited schools. I think you're in a position to give us an answer.
Okay, so we're using Nigeria as a benchmark for developing countries. The answer briefly is no. For the FCT, which is supposed to be the country's capital, there is an appalling inadequacy in wash facilities in schools. Many schools do not have basic running water. Many schools do not have functioning toilets, any form of wash facility at all. As at the time I did a report in 2,840 toilets in schools, in primary schools, basic schools across the FCT. And this 1,740 toilets catered to 227,201 teachers. This information was from the UBEC website in the FCT. I visited the website when I got this invite, but unfortunately, to find out if there had been an upgrade or if facilities were better, that information is no longer available on the website. The last time, in addition, 27,201 pupils that were admitted for the 2016 academic session. They were at the time 8,940 teaching staff in schools across the FCT. So if you look at the figures, you can see that there's an appalling inadequacy. It's not working at all. Over the years, between the time I did the report and now, there have been a little upgrading, but as it stands, it is still grossly inadequate, especially with COVID. COVID forced schools and government to provide some, at least basic facilities, water, running water for many schools across the FCT. But the problem sometimes is maintenance. The functioning wash facilities that were provided, are they still working? Is maintenance, consistent? Because when it was peak of, during the pandemic, when the pandemic was at its peak, there was a bit of attention to wash facilities, but a year down the line, is it still the same? The taps that were provided then, are they still functioning? So these are some of the issues. So I'd say my answer is no.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. 2,721 pupils, you said, and 8,940 teachers, if I got you right, and just 140 toilets. Really, there's
1,740 toilets.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for correcting me. 1,740 toilets. Well, any which way you look at it, when you do the math, it is obviously not enough. Okay, Ayodele, I believe you are here with us now. Can you just give me a high five so I know you're here?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
Okay, great. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, as a photojournalist, I imagine that you have actually captured some of the facilities or some of the state of the facilities that Emiene is talking about. What's your impression about what you saw, what you found when you went around schools? Hello, Ayodele.
Hello, ma.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you come again? Yeah. I'm with you now.
Okay, great. Yes, I was asking you about what your camera had captured. You're a photojournalist. You've gone around schools in Lagos, I believe. What did you see? What did you find?
Hello?
It seems we're having yes. Can you, apparently you can't hear me. Ayo. Okay, let me move on. I will come back to Ayo, hoping that we have a clear connection later on.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yes, did you hear my question?
No, just come again, ma. I'm just trying to change my location.
This is the third time that I will ask the question. I hope you will get it this time. I'm talking about what you found when you went round with your camera. as a photojournalist, what did you capture about the state of facilities, sanitation facilities in Lagos schools?
Well, it's very, very easy. I can tell you that as I went around to the Lagos school to see how the state of the toilet is in Lagos. To my surprise, I'm not satisfied with what is happening around the schools in Lagos. Actually, it's a little difficult for me to get into the school and get a picture. But eventually, when I get in, it smells. The way the toilet is not okay. Even though with the water system, some of them they have pits, which is actually the pit. If they can be able to clean the pit, is better. And the way the pit is very, 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 very bad. It's not hygienic at all, and there's no even water around the place for the children to use. So I move around. We have someone that have water system that they need someone to take care of the place for the children, but they don't do that. I think that is very, very unfortunate. As in for the forerunner state like Lagos, Lagos State can be a school can be like that. I can't even imagine the other state how it will be. And another problem we have in this area that I see is that the maintenance is another problem that they are facing in the schools. When the government provide all those facilities for them, I think they should have someone there. Maybe they will be paying to maintain the environment for the children. So no children like toilets. When one said I want to go to toilet, some of the other people can say, okay, I'm going to. So sometimes you will see 5 or 6 of them lining up to eat themselves.
Yes,
so
I can imagine.
After doing that, I think that there is adults there that can be able to monitor them. It's good. The way the public school is in Lagos, the teacher, they feel reluctant not to even follow the children down to the toilet to see what is going on within them. So those are the things I capture with my picture. And hello?
Yes, I'm with you. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing is that we have some school that is maybe apart from the children, after the school hours, the adult they have access to the school by playing ball, doing some other thing in the school. So when they feel like going to the toilet, they mess up the toilet before the children comes the following day. In which government need to look up to that.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is actually a very important aspect. That even if efforts are made to keep the toilets clean, because adults come in later during the day, they use the facilities and they're not cleaned, and the children come and meet dirty toilets in the mornings, which of course means that infection is a very real likelihood. Okay, at this point, let me introduce our special guest this morning. He's Mr. Oluwadare Kolawole, and he's the Deputy Director of the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, which we know as SERAP. Welcome to the dialogue, Mr. Kolawole. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Good morning. Good morning. Now, SERAP has been involved in research that links issues related to health, education, and water to the increasing level of poverty in Nigeria. Is there a common denominator that binds these 3 elements?
Okay, can I go on?
Yeah.
I had a chime. I didn't know what I was. Okay. Yes, there is a common denominator within the context of the report that we did, which shows that these 3 sectors are very critical public services. Corruption is hindering the access of poor people to these services, and it ends up making them poorer. So you can understand if poor people cannot go to school because they cannot afford the cost of private education. And then they resort to public education, which in fact is said to be free, but in reality is not free. So they end up getting poor education or none at all, not being able to lift themselves out of poverty. And then water being a very important component of health. So you would understand that lack of access to water does not only erode the financial power that you have in, it means you have to source for water for yourself, but it can also bring its own health consequences. And that means that they would have to resort again to private healthcare because the government healthcare is either not within distance or not available at all. And in some cases, corruption also masks the provision of healthcare in that regard. So ultimately, poor people do not have access to these three services because of corruption. And then ultimately, it makes them poorer. It's just a vicious cycle, unfortunately.
Well, it is unfortunate, but I'm curious as to, you know, how you arrived or how Serap arrived at this conclusion. I mean, corruption is quite a heavy word to apply to this situation. I'm sure you've done your research, but perhaps you can just briefly tell us how you arrived at this conclusion.
Thank you very much. So the theme of the report itself is to investigate how corruption has affected the access of poor people, for emphasis, to these three sectors. So it was a mix of interviews with key informants, people who have expert knowledge in this area, including public officers in these sectors and the poor people in this area. And it was done all across Nigeria, covers the 6 geopolitical zones. 2 states were chosen from Nigeria using the National Bureau of Statistics baseline report, so Poverty and Equality Report 2019 as a baseline. And what we found was, in spite of the heavy allocations, budgetary allocations to these sectors, and the minimal releases, because allocation and release are 2 different things. You can have allocation on paper, environment is as low as sometimes 60%. There is little application of the funds to make sure that poor people would have access to these services. So the middle class and the rich can always afford the alternative, which is private sourcing for water, private healthcare, and private schools. But the poor people cannot. And that is why we found that it is not the lack of budgetary allocation to these sectors that is hindering the poor, because you would see the national budget year in, year out allocate big amounts of money to these sectors for poor people, but they never get the benefit. And then ultimately, where did the money go, which is a natural question to ask. And then we found out that it didn't quite, it didn't get to the people. And we have statistics from the report as well, which shows that most people living in poverty are not only self-employed, but in sourcing for water, they spend as much as 35% of their income on these 3 sectors combined. And that is, we are not talking about security or any other thing. Just these 3 sectors alone takes a very large chunk.
Which is what is supposed to be supplied by government.
Exactly. And then it makes them poor. And it's very interesting find. And you would find that in spite of these what you call rather unfortunate circumstances, a very high percentage, 87%, have hope that things are going to get better. And that hope is not based on logic or reasoning. It's just a hope. And really very interesting.
Wow. Okay. It makes me, begin to realize that when we talk about the lives that have been lost to cholera in this year alone, because I think we have some figures, 653 Nigerians as of July. Obviously, if cholera was the cause of those deaths, then we're looking at people within the lower rung of income groups being the, shall I use the word, victims of this situation. Okay, thank you very much. I will come back to you shortly. This is the Dialogue Education Series, and we're highlighting the state of education, particularly basic education in Nigeria. The Dialogue is sponsored by Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism under its Regulators Monitoring Program, REMOP, and it's brought to you by Strictly Speaking in partnership with Premium Times. Emiene, I would like to come back to you. I hope you can hear me. Emiene, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you clearly.
Great. I want to ask you a question. Actually, it's a subject that most people don't want to discuss, but then we know that at some point or other, all females will begin to menstruate. What challenges are schoolgirls facing when it comes to essential wash facilities? And how is this affecting menstrual hygiene?
The challenge that schoolgirls face, children generally, especially at that level, is enormous. It's so bad that it forces some schoolgirls to miss school. I'll paint a graphic picture of how toilets in some of the schools I visited look. The toilets are somewhere in abandoned places at the back of the school, maybe a block of 3 or 4 or 6 toilets if there are so many, and that's about it. And the toilets are in very poor state. Some of them are pit latrines. So first of all, it's very discouraging. Nobody even wants to use the toilet in the first instance. So for girls, when they are in their periods, some, from what the teachers told me, totally skip school because there's nowhere to change. The toilets are so bad. When they want to ease themselves, they use the bushes around. And when you walk around the area where they do their business, the place has a very foul smell. So to avoid the embarrassment of getting to school and getting stained and having her classmates laugh at her, because usually pupils at this stage are still young. Many of their classmates, for those who are seeing their period, don't even understand what is happening to the girls. So they're not likely to be, have any empathy for this girl. So they'll be made fun of. They'll become the subject of jokes among the boys and even among some girls as well. So what the teacher said is that some of the older girls who have started menstruating would skip school on the days that, they are seeing their periods. Already the girl child enrollment figure is lower than the boy child enrollment figure. So this further worsens an already bad situation. So the girls stay out of school, for depending on how long their period lasts. For some people it's 5 days, for some it's 3 days, for some it's 2 days. So they stay out of school for that period. And this happens in some of the poorer communities where, even the school they are going to is quite basic. Because people who are in the city center, in the FCT, some of them can afford a lot of things, but those in the more rural areas, the ones, out of the cities, those in the area councils, do not have some of these luxuries.
Yes.
Can you hear me? So
yes, I can.
It's a terrible situation for the girls, and if something is not done, they keep missing school. It affects their performance in school because you've missed school, you've missed the notes. When you come back, you're always playing catch up. Every month you have to play catch up. You have to copy notes that you missed on the days you were not in school. If there were tests during those days, you have to follow up with the teachers to give you the tests and so on and so forth. So the effect on the girl child, and then it affects them psychologically too. You have to keep explaining to people every month that you were not in school. Why? You can't tell the whole class that is because you were not in your period. So you have to tell maybe a few people this is why you were not in school. So it's, the effect is quite devastating for the girls who are. But because we do not talk about such topics in quotes, for many communities, especially for the rural communities, periods are somewhat taboo topics. It's not something you talk about openly. So these girls are not able to share their experiences. They are not able to share their concerns. They're not able to talk about how this affects them.
Yes, that's why I thought we should actually discuss it this morning. Thank you for explaining what the situation is on the ground. So, Mr. Kolawole, we have what seems to me to be like a catch-22 situation in Nigeria. There are schools with water, but no toilets. And there are schools with toilets, but no water. And some with just outdated pits. In your estimation, what do you think it's going to take for Nigeria to attain SDG 6 by 2030? Because we're talking about ending open defecation, providing access to sanitation and hygiene, and having safe and affordable drinking water. What do we need to do?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't think the answer is throwing in more funds, even though that would have to come in at a point. What we need to do firstly, and I think most importantly, is to ensure that the funds that we are putting, even before now, is put to judicious use. And that means that right from the budgetary process, we are deliberate. And then it means that these sectors, every sector linked to achieving goal 6 of the XDG must get at the least maybe 99% funds release and budget performance. That is very important. So in a country like Nigeria, when you see even institutions of government being on first line charge, for instance, the National Assembly gets a block vote along with other people, statutory transfers. And that means that the expense of education, water and health, the National Assembly will get its fund annually for everyone. And that means other sectors, including the funds for capital expenditure, will get sometimes 60%, 70% budgetary allocations that will eventually get to them. So we need to ensure that the funds get to these agencies that need them. That is one. And two is to ensure that mechanisms are in place to ensure that these funds do not end up in private pockets. Like I've said, the research that we've undertook could show that budgets were allocated. They might not be enough or meet with international minimum standards, but funds were allocated to each of these sectors, but they did not get to the recipients or what they should be used for. And I think it's very important that we track, and I think a lot of CSOs are doing a good job of that to ensure that those funds get to the intended beneficiaries and they are used for what they should be used to. And then number 3, if there are instances of corruption or misuse of these funds, I'm sorry you might think I'm emphasizing on corruption, but that is just the fact on ground. It is just monies are released, but it never gets to the use it's meant to use for, as highlighted, for instance, by the Auditor General of the Federation. It means that individuals or public institutions who are found to be culpable, who have been misused funds, should face justice. And importantly, the funds should be recovered and put back in public coffers for the use it was intended for in the first place. I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay, so you've given us three things to think about, three ways to move us forward. By the way, I believe it was in November 2018 that President Muhammadu Buhari declared a state of emergency on the country's wash sector. Would you say that state of emergency still exists?
I don't think so. And the facts on ground and the actions of government do not show that. For instance, we have a legal framework, and I'll mention just two, the National Health Act and the Universal Basic Education Act, which feeds into Goal 6, for instance, and WASH itself, provides, incidentally, both laws have Section 11 of the laws, provides for not less than 1% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation should be allocated to the National Health Fund, the National Health Act, and to the Universal Basic Education Fund. It is surprising that up till now, even in the 2022 appropriation bill, even last year at the height of COVID, what was allocated was just barely 1%. And the phrasing of the law is very clear, not less than 1. And that in simple English means it could be 2% of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, it could be 4%, it could be higher. Even at the height of COVID in 2020, what government allocated to the health sector as part of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, in keeping with the National Health Act, is just 1%. And these funds, it is not, again, the paucity of funds. Funds were allocated for other things that government deems more important. So ultimately, it's just, it amounts to just lip service, more talk and less action.
This is The Dialogue, a series on the state of education, particularly basic education in Nigeria, and it's sponsored by Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism under its Regulators Monitoring Program in partnership with Strictly Speaking and Premium Times. Now, at the beginning of this program, I did say that we would be discussing an additional topic today. The tragic death of 12-year-old Sylvester Oromoni, allegedly as a result of bullying, has brought this brutally antisocial behavior to the fore. Consequently, the education sector has become even more of a cause for concern. Without prejudice to the ongoing investigations, I would like us to talk about the antisocial menace of bullying. Mr. Kolawole, Serap is one of Nigeria's most vocal defenders of human rights. Do you think that as a people, we actually understand what bullying is? Is that something that we don't get?
I think we understand. And I think what is lacking is possibly the empathy to put someone else in our place. Again, this is not a failure of a legal framework. So our human rights mechanisms, like other laws elsewhere, is not perfect. So we have Chapter 4 of the Constitution that provides for a wide range of rights. And Chapter 2 is dedicated to a wide range of socioeconomic rights. But I think as a nation, given our history, particularly since 1999, we have seen less of empathy from us as people. And of course, we get the leaders are chosen from among us. So if there is little empathy as citizens, you would understand that there will be little empathy, even on the part of the government, because they are made up of individuals that are chosen from the citizens. So it is not the failure of the laws, it is we understanding and putting other people in our place. So for the average public officer that mismanages funds, if he understands that those funds are meant to cater for someone on life support, is meant to send someone to school, he wouldn't do that because he would put himself in this place. So talking of bullying, it is not only unlawful, but it is at the heart of human rights, because it means that you recognize that while you have rights to exist and to do whatever you want to do, that other person also has rights not only to live, but to live within the space where he is not only free, but he can flourish. So I think I will take this more from the moral perspective of our national psyche, more or less than the laws. So this knee-jerk reaction that we've seen of it's not a failure of the laws. I don't think so. It's I'll call it the moral compass of the society seems to be out of sync, and I think we all know that. But we seem not to be able to find a true north on our moral compass. That is why we need to have critical discussions like this. Maybe, perhaps, even with the influence of religion, we'll be able to find our way home somehow. I'm sorry, I'm not too positive on this. Call me a cynic, but it's not looking good presently.
Well, I may not call you a cynic. I may call you a realist. The facts are on the ground, and we see what's happening. I wonder, Emiene, if you could come in here. Perhaps you might have some thoughts about what parents can do to help their children become a bit more vocal about what is happening to others, even if victims can't stand up for themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. So
good.
I can hear you, ma'am.
All right.
So I disagree slightly with Mr. Kolawole on the presence of laws. Many schools, for instance, do not recognize that bullying exists. So they will not even know, the teachers will not even know what bullying is if it was staring them in the face. That is one. Many parents are tone deaf when it comes to bullying as well. They still do not understand that. So Nigerians have this mentality that it was what they did to me in my own time. Nobody wants to stop what they did to me in my own time from happening to people coming after me. Everybody feels that they did it to me, so these people too must, suffer. So as unfortunate as this incident is, I think it will help schools, for instance, put basic laws in place to deter people from bullying or students from bullying their mates. It will also open the eyes of parents to understand that certain behavioral traits among their children or with their children or in their children is antisocial and is bullying and is wrong and should be discouraged. Because if you go through social media, you hear different examples. Oh, this child was doing this to another child, and the mother said, oh no, leave the child, it's okay, don't do anything, it's just a child, it's just a child. And the child grows up with it's just a child and thinks he can get away with anything. And then he goes to a private school. Private schools mostly are, for want of a better word, they are businesses, and they're run as businesses, and the pupils are their customers, and customer is always right. So they are not going to be maybe as harsh on the students as they should ordinarily be for fear of losing their patronage. Some schools will tell you that, this woman has 3 children in my school. If I can't have her pull 3 children at once. So they are softer maybe on some students, some are softer on some because they have more students, they have 3 siblings or more in the school, some because of the position they believe that the parents have in society, and they can pull more students to their school. So the dynamics is quite it's a serious mix of so many factors that affect. And this happens, it is because it is in a public private school that we're even hearing about it. What goes on in public schools is probably even worse. Those ones have no voice to speak out. So if there's a case of bullying, for instance, in a public school, I mean, the child is from the rural area, who's going to speak for the child? Doesn't even have access to social media. So it just goes unnoticed. And these children grow up that way, damaged. And then they're also, when they grow up, they have grown up with that mindset. This is how they're also going to live and relate with other people, and this is how they're going to socialize their children as well. So something has to be done from now. This should be a wake-up call to Nigerians, to parents, to do something about it, to schools. The Inspectorate Division of Ministry of Education, I don't understand what they're doing. I don't know if they actually are functional in many states across the country.
I wanted to come to that because, and I wanted to throw that question back to Mr. Kolawole, because I believe that there are some schools that have anti-bullying policies, but there are some schools that don't. And I was under the impression that the federal and state ministries of education have quality assurance departments. Now, before a school is licensed, would this kind of policy not be one of those that should be mandatory?
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, when I was referring to legal frameworks, I mean the laws of Nigeria, not the policies of schools. You would understand that the policies of schools will ultimately be subservient to the laws of Nigeria. So we have laws that would makes bullying a crime. Even Section 24 and 25 of the Cyber Crimes Act provides for cyberbullying, which is bullying online. So it is not because we don't have laws. Yes, schools may not have policies. Some schools may not have policies, and some may have and not enforce them. That is still under the umbrella of the national laws, which makes it a crime and a wrong to do that. And to your question of the Ministry of Education and their oversight, the administrative controls over the schools, I wouldn't know whether that forms a part of what the criteria for having a school, but as their function is to regulate the school, much like the NCC regulates network providers and the NBC regulates media, they would have frameworks and items that would have to tick as a criteria to start a school, and what they would inspect from time to time, whether those things are in existence. Even we're looking at, within the context of our discussion, how many schools have CCTV, for instance, that would monitor and regulate and prevent things like sexual abuse? We are not even talking about that presently because possibly we don't have a case at hand presently. And I would believe, as a logical Nigerian anyway, that should be part of the checklist that they should have. I am not privy to those details of what they should have or what they shouldn't. But I agree with and I think Emiene is making the same point I made earlier. It is less about the laws as it were. It is still more of morals, because he has spoken about parents need to parent their child. Do we need laws again to tell parents to train their children? No, it's a moral obligation. They should be able to discharge that without any legal framework. And again, I'm happy we're having a discussion about this at this moment. It's a wake-up call both to the regulators and government and to individual parents as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, Emiene has spoken about parents, and so have you. And well, it's one thing to to talk about external insecurity, but now a lot of parents are, really panicking about internal security. And I wonder, Emiene, do you see the role of PTAs evolving into something different going forward?
Sorry, I didn't hear you clearly. Network was fluctuating. Okay. Sorry.
Yes, I was talking about internal insecurity. Because
did you hear me?
Episode, yes. Hello.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. All right, fine. I was talking about internal insecurity. In past episodes, we've talked about external insecurity. But now, as I mentioned, parents are panicking about the internal security of their children. And I'm looking at the role of PTAs. As we go forward, we're moving into 2022. Do you think that the role of PTAs could change?
I think that the role of PTAs should actually change. So at some point in the lives of PTAs, you discover that they become like cliques. There are people who are, always the ones in, heading the PTA and deciding what happens in the school. And, the school would usually consult them and offer them certain things for.
Hello, we seem to have.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I went off. My network was bad.
Okay, please, could you start again?
Okay, so I'm saying that the role of PTAs should change. They should have a more direct influence. For instance, certain matters should be treated at the PTA level and escalated to security agencies if need be. They should also be, I know that many schools have guidance counselors, but the role of guidance counselors, we do not utilize them fully. I think, the PTA should emphasize more, utilization of guidance counselors. Some children are troubled. Some children, sometimes they have cases of abuse. What they're projecting is abuse from home. There are problems from the home front. So when they come to school, this reflects in their interaction with their colleagues and their friends in school. So if there is a functional PTA, that comes to the school regularly to inspect, to find out, keeps regular checks on the school, and there's a guidance counselor who the children can approach, who is not an official, very official human being that, the children feel free to unburden themselves to. Some of these things can be checked, before they become disasters like the Dowen College issue. So there's someone you can speak with. There's someone you can bear your mind to. So if there's abuse at home, I'm aware, that sometimes cases of abuse are discovered in schools. There's different kinds of abuse. So in public schools, for instance, there are children who, aunties and uncles brought to the city to train, in quotes, and then they turn these children to house helps. So some of these cases have been able to be have been resolved because the child opened up to a teacher in school, and the teacher discovered that there was abuse going on at home. So the child can't concentrate, and then brings it to the attention of I did one case like that. I think one of the reports I did, the child was being molested at home. When she came to school, she told the teacher told PTA chairman involved napped it. And the child got justice, and she was removed from the abusive environment and placed in a shelter, and she continued with her education. So yes, I think the role of PTAs should evolve at this time in the light of the present challenges that we currently face. We underplay the issues of bullying a lot. For instance, for boys, where you could tell a boy that, oh, he's not tough. That's why they are bullying him. So you tell him to toughen up. You tell the girl to toughen up. But bullying is wrong. You shouldn't even be bullied in the first instance. So I think, yes, the PTAs have a strong role to play, and their role should actually evolve.
Well, it seems that he's no longer with us. I was curious about if he'd ever captured any scenes that depict bullying with his camera. Okay, Mr. Kolawole, I think we have talked about the issue of bullying enough. It is unfortunate. Apparently, it is not just happening in Lagos, it's happening in other places. And, there are equally tragic consequences. Would you perhaps have a word of advice to school owners, because we've talked about parents, we've talked about the role of the ministries of education, both state and federal. What about the school owners? Perhaps you might have something to say to them, because fair enough, it may be more of a moral issue than a legal issue. But when the moral aspect breaks down completely, it is likely to end up in the law courts.
Thank you very much. And I think I would have to take a different position this time. I think I'll pull that squarely and it's the regulators that should enforce this. So when I spoke about morality the other time, I was speaking from a place of skepticism, really. You cannot pontificate for people to do what is right. That is why we have laws. That is why we evolved the social contract theory in the first place, to make sure there are laws and regulators. Regulators are enforcers of the law to make sure that people comply. So rather than speak to school owners, who I ensure are duty bearers also, I would rather speak to the duty bearers of the regulators, because that is why they are there. And so they can even do a better job of educating the school owners as to what they should do or shouldn't do. So if the regulators are doing their job the way they should, I believe we will have less of these issues and less of these problems. And it means also that the regulator can be more proactive. So we're talking about bullying now. What about sexual harassment? But none has happened recently, so we're not talking about it. So it means even the regulators should be able to say, we have noticed this, and this is what we think you should do. So the regulator, it should be a step ahead to see issues and address them. So while I agree with you, the moral issue is there, but I think we'll be doing a lot more to make sure that the regulators enforce the laws, albeit inadequate the laws are, rather than speaking to the schools to do this and that. So for instance, if I was to advise the schools, I would say, for instance, they should not only have CCTV, and I agree with Emiene that they should have a robust mechanism to counsel students. But how many schools have guidance counselors? And if they have, what is the qualification? And if they are really qualified, do they really do what they're supposed to do? And even in the business of counseling students, if there's some sort of research to understand the dynamics of this is what we've seen as a problem as in this our own environment, and these are the things we should do. So we cannot possibly finish the scope of what the schools should do. It is the regulators that should make sure that they are not only reactive but proactive in solving issues, making sure that the school owners are on their toes and they do what they should do from time to time.
All right. Thank you very, very much. I think we've had a very robust discussion this morning. Thank you all for your lively participation. I believe we've really learned quite a lot over the last 6 weeks, and we've dissected several problems actually affecting basic education. We've talked about insecurity, poor infrastructure, funding, special needs education, and today we've talked about WASH, facilities, and we've also touched on bullying. Emiene, do you have a last word that you would like to contribute to this discussion before we draw it to a close?
Yes. Like Mr. Kolawole said, I totally agree. The regulators in the Ministry of Education need to sit up. They are not doing their job is not so impressive as we speak. There's so much that is wrong with schools at the basic level, schools generally in Nigeria, that a little closer supervision can fix. Because these schools know that, especially private schools and even government schools, they know when their inspectors are coming, so they know to put on a good show. The private schools know what to do to be in the good books of the regulators. So if they do their job, properly, the way it is supposed to be done, we can check some of these issues, we can make progress in the education sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Kolawole, let's give you the last word. Hello? Mr. Kolawole, are you still there?
Yes, I'm back. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No problem, no problem. I was saying that we should give you the last word as our special guest on today's program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that privilege. To the government is to ensure that they do what they should because the law says they should do so. And to the citizens, as holding government to account is part of the critical civic responsibility we hold. And that means speaking up and having conversations like these from time to time to make sure that people should do the right thing, do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to thank all of our guests and all the journalists too who have participated in the dialogue. I think they've all demonstrated their commitment to achieving SDG 4, which, by the way, is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Well, this has been the dialogue, and it's been sponsored by the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism under its Regulators Monitoring Program, REMOP, and it has been brought to you by Strictly Speaking in partnership with Premium Times. Thank you very much to all our special guests on this particular episode, Mr. Oluwadare Kolawole, Deputy Director of the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP. You guys are doing a great job. Please keep up the good work. And of course, to my colleagues from the media who have shared field experiences with us, Ayodele Adeniran, a senior photojournalist at the Guardian newspaper, and Emiene Erame, who is editor of the All Women Media. Thank you for joining us today. My thanks also go to everyone who's been watching and commenting. This is actually the last episode in this particular series. The program, as you know, is called The Dialogue, but we dubbed it the Education Series. We hope that we'll be able to come back with alternative subheadings, but the name, The Dialogue, will remain. So meanwhile, on behalf of everyone at Strictly Speaking, Premium Times, and the WSCIJ, here's wishing you a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. I'm your host, Bimbo Oloyede. God bless. See you next year.
There's fire on the mountain, and nobody seems to be on the run. Oh, there is fire on the mountain top, and no one is running. I wake up in the morning, tell you what I see on my TV screen. I see the blood of an innocent child, and everybody's watching. Now I'm looking out my window, and what do I see? I see an army of a soldier man marching across the street. Hey, hey, Mr. Soldier Man, tomorrow is the day you go to war. Boy, you are fighting for another man's guns, and you don't even know him. Ooh, what did it say to make you?